At the beginning of February 1972, I got an unexpected call from my childhood friend and secret crush, Murray. I was 21. Being the month of St. Valentine, my heart skipped a beat. If Mary knew I had held the torch for him since childhood, he'd never let on before. Mostly he'd remained a pal, always looking out for his younger neighbor. Now, it was well known in our circle that Mary had just landed a week-long gig as an usher on Philadelphia's Mike Douglas TV show. Purring into the phone, Mary asked, "Hey, do you want one of my passes to the Douglas show?" For Mike Douglas? Why would I? I was incredulous. Douglas hosted guests of my parents' generation from a small basement studio in the heart of Center City. The show was old-fashioned, and Douglas was a charming conservative at best and square as a pizza box at worst. Much as I still hankered for my handsome friend Mary, I dismissed the invitation, wanting to return to my graduate studies and wondering why he was inviting me at all. Uh, I think you'll want this pass. With his movie star good looks and long, lean frame, Mary could sometimes be a bit arrogant. The silence on my end prompted an unusual blurt from his. For Christ's sake, John Lennon and Yoko Ono are co-hosting the whole week. Now, my adamant love of John Lennon was pretty well known. How had I missed the news that John Lennon and Yoko Ono were co-hosting the Mike Douglas show? I can tell you, that got me down from my high horse pretty quick. Offering some gushy, girly apology, I thanked him profusely for the offer. And since I lived in Center City, Mary suggested we meet near my apartment for the handoff of that pass. The day came, and I dressed appropriately. Brit hip in my brown houndstooth miniskirt, matching dark cocoa tights and cashmere sweater, set off by brown platform boots. The ensemble seemed spray painted on my twiggy frame, and my embroidered Afghan sheepskin coat completed the look. The truth is, I hardly remember anything about the show. I was so excited. It was the day after the famous Chuck Berry appearance. The local and national news media had made a great fuss about John Lennon fulfilling his lifetime dream of playing with his musical inspiration and idol, Chuck Berry. It made me feel kind of good to know my idol had wanted to meet his idol. It was a Thursday. I remember it because it was my day off from the book department gig as a junior buyer and cashier in Philadelphia's iconic Wanamaker's department store. Now, the guest pass seat was near the back, but the studio was so intimate, we could just about reach out and touch the stage from any seat in the house. Mary had selected an aisle seat, so if John or Yoko came into the audience, there was a chance I could reach out and touch them. But there was another reason. Since the previous December, I had come down with a rare disability. It was diagnosed as myasthenia gravis, a debilitating neuromuscular disorder that not much was known about. My left foot dragged and my hands would stop working. Sometimes I collapsed. The doctors had placed me on a brand new and frightening regime of drugs called cholinesterase inhibitors. I was a guinea pig of sorts. The doctors were still working on the drugs and the dosages, and my life had been turned upside down. Murray was being very mindful of his childhood friend. After the show was over, he fetched me around the stage door, insisting, "Now wait here." And I did. After a time, that mid-February East Coast bone-numbing cold triggered my new malady. I had waited for what seemed like hours and finally turned, disappointed, to walk the 10 short blocks back to my apartment when a voice resonated behind my shoulder. "Say, love, are you Susan?" I turned, almost collapsing, and a hand reached out to steady me. There were John and Yoko, all big smiles, and alone. I nodded with such enthusiasm I must have looked like one of those bobble-headed dolls. "You got a good mate there in Mary, you know." John's Liverpudlian accent drove the frost from my bones. Yoko added in her high Japanese lilt, "He was very concerned that we meet you." And at that, she extended her hand, which I shook as ardently as a jiffy popcorn on a gas stove. Mary must have played the sympathy card because they asked me all about my myasthenia gravis, and I answered as best I could. Definitely in shock. Barely registering that I was standing with two people whose art and romance I idolized. Yoko seemed truly pleased to learn I owned both her and John's poetry books, which I happen to have here, the originals, Grapefruit by Yoko Ono, and In His Own Right by John Lennon. She nodded knowingly when I explained, well, I was an English lit grad student majoring in modern fiction and poetry. You know, even while I stood with them, they holding hands, it was like a dream. They were relaxed, natural, and kind. Yeah. I remember the feeling more like a muscle memory than our words and our conversation. 30 years later, in 2001, my late husband, Martijn, who knew this story well, bought tickets for my 51st birthday to see Yoko and Sean perform at Minneapolis's Walker Art Center. Martijn encouraged me to bring that book along, just in case. It turns out, as an extra surprise, Martijn had arranged a special backstage pass to meet Yoko Ono. Once again, I found myself alone in the company of Yoko. And when I offered her my book to sign, mentioning the Mike Douglas show 30 years before, she smiled that enigmatic smile and said she perfectly remembered that young girl in the miniskirt with the strange illness. She signed my book and kissed my cheek. Thank you.
Susan, what a fantastic story.
Thanks. There
Oh,
they are.
and isn't it fabulous when you hear about legendary figures who are really just the real deal? They're just